turned entrepreneur. And so I help mostly women entrepreneurs figure out the legal side of their business so that they can protect themselves and really create the business that they want to online.
Amazing. And Elan? She's got that nailed. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one to follow. But yes, Elan Zisman here from Ziggy Media. We are a digital marketing company. Lori has asked us to come on here, asked myself to come on here just to kind of help you guys make sense of everything that Sam teaches you and all the tips in terms of getting compliant and how we can actually use the technology to make that happen.
Okay, so let's dive in. Sam, do you want to just start us off with what is the GDPR and what's the point of it?
Yeah, sure. So all day, Lori, I thought that was going to be your first question. I was like, how funny would it be if I was like, I don't know, and just started out that way. I'd be like, what else are we here to talk about? Yeah, like, I don't know. It's kind of crazy. No, unfortunately, I do know a bit about the GDPR at this point because I forced myself to read the whole darn thing so I could understand it. So anywho, the GDPR actually stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's an EU privacy law. It's actually, you guys might think it's completely new, but it's actually just that it's coming into compliance by May 25th. So it was actually implemented 2 years ago, but now you're hearing a lot about it, just to give you kind of some context, because this date is coming up within like 2 or 3 weeks. So essentially, it's a EU privacy law that regulates what we do with people's personal data. And so I wanted to go over really quickly, like who this applies to and when in the beginning, because the way that we're all going to talk about this is really different depending on you and where you live, or where you're located, I should say. So if you are in the EU, then the GDPR applies to absolutely everything you do, no matter who you're emailing and where they live, because all that matters with the GDPR is that one or more parties is located within the EU. So if you're writing your little emails from a cafe in France and you're emailing people from Canada and the US, it applies to how you send them those emails. It also applies to how you bring them into your email list and your privacy policy. If, on the other hand, you do not live in the EU, which I'm assuming for today's talk, like most of the people listening probably don't, for the bulk of us. So if you live anywhere else outside the EU, what we're talking about today, and so make sure that you hear this loud and clear, what we're talking about today only applies to what you do and what you send to people who are located within the EU. So I've been getting so many emails lately, people freaking out thinking that they have to delete like everyone from their email list, or like freaking out about something else. But no, this just applies to, for those of you who are not in the EU, it just applies to like how you bring those people in and how and what you send them. So that's kind of what we're talking about today, just to give you guys some context.
And I'll just say for myself, no one's happy about this. Like, I'm pretty sure the people in the EU also are not happy about this, because their ability to receive information has just been severely limited. So no one's happy about it. And at the same time, it's still something that we all have to comply with. And we're going to give you the strategy that I'm going to be implementing into my business so that you have a very tangible way that you can also implement this into your business, because you will have people from the EU, or I would actually even add to this, Sam, unknown locations.
Unknowns, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's people who are physically in the EU, whether they live there or not, who are physically in the EU, and also unknown location. So as of right now, I think I had 5,600 people on my email list from an unknown location. Do you know how annoying that is?
Yeah.
Like, that's not even the people in the EU. That's just unknown location. So do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, and it really depends, because sometimes, and most email providers, whether you're using like an Ontraport or an Aweber or an Active Campaign, most of them will pull that geographic data automatically, but sometimes they can't. And it's the ones that can't that we need to be concerned about, and we want to make sure that if we don't have their geographic data, we have to treat them similar to as we would a regular EU citizen and try and get that consent, which I'm sure Sam will cover pretty soon.
Yeah, I was going to say when we talk through this kind of in more detail in terms of the steps, my step number one is segmentation. And so included in my my info for you guys today is going to be about step number one is segmenting, and you're including in the segmentation, however you do it. Like I use ConvertKit. So I tagged everybody who's in the EU and the unknowns under EU plus unknown. And I just tagged them as one thing. So I'm going to exclude them from certain emails and kind of work it out on my end.
Okay, so let's actually go through that. Let's do it slowly so that everyone watching can take notes, although this recording will live in multiple locations and we will be providing you with a transcript. So now that we understand what it is, it's data protection. It basically means, do you want to sort of elaborate on what it means before we do that actually?
Yeah, so I was going to talk about, there are really like 6 principles behind the GDPR, which I will not bore anybody with because nobody needs to hear about these, or wants to rather. But basically, I think like the biggest of the 6 principles that you guys need to know is that essentially people's personal data, which is defined by the GDPR, and again, I will skip. I think we can all assume for today's purposes, this is like email addresses, names, maybe birthday, address, credit card information. We're talking like pretty basic personal information. So it's basically, the GDPR is basically saying that we have to process that data lawfully. And so it gives us a number of ways, I think 5 to be exact, of ways that we can process their personal data lawfully. But I think that the one that we should talk about today, because 99.9% of you are going to be going with this one, is affirmative consent. So we'll talk through kind of what affirmative consent means, and then basically my steps and my recommendations for how you just tackle this thing. And then you guys will talk more about the back end technical stuff. But essentially, when we think about consent, remember, we're just talking about those people that we email who are located within the EU, or whose personal data we collect who are located within the EU, that no longer is it the case that somebody downloads your freebie and then they are shoved over to your general email list, or receiving your weekly newsletters, or getting promotional emails, or entering an email sequence, because they have not opted in and given you affirmative consent to receive your email sequence, your marketing emails, all that kind of stuff, right? So everybody who's been on your list so far has probably not given you affirmative consent. That's really important to know, because we're going to talk about that when we go through the steps. So essentially with the GDPR, affirmative consent is telling us that you have to get affirmative consent for all the little specific, I'm calling them like categories of emails. So I would say like putting your name in your email, it says like on my website, for example, like get your free legally legit guide. I'm just getting their consent to send them my legally legit guide, because I'm actually fulfilling a contract in that case. But if I wanted their affirmative consent to also get like, I would probably put other categories like general email newsletter, marketing and promotion, special offers and prices, or something like that. I would have separate checkboxes or places for them to check, for them to affirmatively consent to receiving those types of emails as well. And there are a number of tricky things that we can talk through with the GDPR, but you are not allowed to have the checkboxes pre-checked. So the default has to be unchecked. So those checkboxes have to be blank. It also cannot be conditional upon them receiving your free stuff. So you can't have it so like, get my free legally legit guide, but in order for you to get that, you have to agree to receiving future emails from me. They have to be able to browse your site, and also just be able to get your freebie without consenting to anything else if they don't want to. So that's kind of the first thing that we're talking about here, is that's like the big game changer, I would say, with the GDPR, is just this idea of affirmative consent. And go ahead, Lori.
I was just going to say, I just want to remind everybody that it's only for people in the EU, because you're saying everybody. So I just want to reiterate that it's only for people in the EU and unknown location. Our email service providers, I'm sure, are getting inundated with, changes that they have to make to their way that they process data, so that they do a better job of providing location for us, so that we only have to ask for affirmative consent from those people in the EU or unknown locations. So it's not everybody, it's just those people that have to then consent to the next step. So I'm going to give an example before we move on. So you have a lead that has come in from somewhere off of social media, and they have raised their hand and said, yes, I want to subscribe to the 5-day sugar-free challenge. You do not need their consent to send them any email directly related to the 5-day sugar-free challenge. Therefore, you don't need to have consent box on your opt-in page nor your thank you page, because they have already given you consent to get that container of information, right? The problem is most of us, if we're good marketers, and if I've taught you anything, is we then transition them into a sales process, a funnel. We can no longer do that with people from the EU or undisclosed locations. So after the consent has to come basically at the same time or after you're fulfilling that original contract, which is giving them the content specific and only to the lead magnet, right? Am I right?
Yes, just remember, like, so the example that Lori used is a 5-day challenge. So that would make sense that you probably have like a 5-time, email sequence. Just remember that if you're sending them like a specific download, like a PDF, a guide, an ebook or whatever, under the GDPR, and like, remember with everything we're talking about today, the GDPR has not come out yet. So nobody knows exactly how it's going to be implemented or enforced. But with our reading of it, the idea is that if you just had somebody download your freebie, that you actually can't send them your email sequence following that freebie. So really all you can do is send them that initial email.
Just the immediate response. And from my understanding, any email that's directly related back to that original contract. So we teach people an immediate response plus a 1-day later email. That's directly tied to, there's no selling, there's no marketing, there's no calls to action, there's no change of contract, let's say, if we're going to use those words. It's directly related to the original premise. That, from my understanding, is that okay? Is that okay?
We're not sure,
No
to be
one's
honest.
sure.
So that we're hoping, sure, because especially like you said, because we're not selling and all that good stuff. But I think it's also important to remember that even before GDPR, all of us needed this, we needed a privacy policy anyway, and we should have been sending out our emails compliant with like Can Spam Act in the US and Canadian privacy laws. So it's like, having that unsubscribe button has become even more important than it already was. So that would kind of be a little out. It's not an excuse, by the way. So just because a lot of people have said to me, well, it'd be okay as long as I had the unsubscribe option there, right? And so it's like, no, you have to have that anyway. You have to have that like in addition, but it's not a get out of jail free card. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, and then Elan is going to show us actually how to set that up in our email marketing platforms. So let's talk about what affirmative consent actually looks like.
Yeah, so I've kind of broken this down into 2 categories. So if it were me and I was located, if I was the one who was sending out the stuff and located within the EU, I would have this stuff everywhere. So I would have affirmative consent options pretty much everywhere. But I'm going to talk through from the perspective of people located outside the EU. Just know that if you are located within it, you want to like do all of this stuff, versus if you're outside the EU, I would recommend picking like 1 to 2 of the things that I'm going to recommend, and then that you guys probably will recommend as well. So step number 1, which I think Lori has already alluded to, is like on anywhere that your forms appear, or opt-in pages, sales pages, landing pages, all that fun stuff, having an option for either checkboxes, which of course are unchecked, or a drop-down menu. That's another way that I've seen it be done. Personally, I use ConvertKit, so they're allowing us to make it so that if someone's located within the EU or unknown, then it will show the checkbox options, but it won't show it to other people. So that's kind of cool, because then you don't have to worry, because we get ourselves into a little bit of a pickle here. If you put the checkboxes everywhere, and now a Canadian goes on there and goes onto your landing page and they don't check it, what does that mean? That's kind of like an awkward thing, because then it's like, well, wait, does she not want to get my emails now? And now has she not consented? So it's kind of strange. So to the best of your ability, you really want this stuff to only appear to EU people. So you guys are going to talk much more about that. But so that's kind of step number 1. I think the second place I would recommend it in terms of grabbing affirmative consent which just makes sense, is like a redirect or a thank you page of some sort. So maybe somebody fills out your initial form for your freebie, and you should hopefully be redirecting them to some kind of thank you page or back to your site or whatever anyway. Now I would add an option, however you do this is kind of up to the systems that you use, but I would add some sort of option to say like, hey, thanks so much for downloading my whatever. Would you like to receive my newsletter and some special offers and promotions where I send out like exclusive resources to my list? And you could probably do that by a form. You could do it by clicking a link, like depending on what service that you use. And then third option I would think of is that in your delivery email. So for the freebie, you send the delivery email now. You'd say like, here's your guide. And then if you'd like to receive these other emails from me, this is like where you need to click basically to, and so for me, for ConvertKit, it's going to tag the person. That's the option that I'm using. So I'm using just to let everyone know as an example, I'm using the option of only showing checkboxes to EU people, and then also including the links in my delivery email. But the reason I'm doing it that way, and you guys can break this down more, but the reason I'm doing it that way is because once they come into your list, then you capture their location information. So I'm basically having it that once they come into my list, ConvertKit's automatically tagging them as being unknown or located in the EU. And so then it's only sending that email with the delivery email and those links to those people. So it's not like it's going out to everyone, because again, we're going to run into that awkward situation where it's like, well, they didn't click on the link, but they're an American. So now what do I do? So that's how I'm doing it.
Yeah. And just to reiterate that, I'm going to emphasize not everyone has to get those consent emails. It's just the people in the EU or an unknown location. So most platforms, ConvertKit, Entreport, Active Campaign, I'm not sure if ClickFunnels is fancy enough to know the location to like know to change the page to show or not show. Elaine can probably speak to that more, but just making sure that you have consent shown to only the people in the EU and undisclosed location, because otherwise it's confusing and you're going to lose out on leads. There's a question, and then maybe we'll jump over to Elan so he can actually show this part. And then Sam, we can come back and sort of finish, because I think it makes sense to jump in here. So Katie's asking, which is a really good question, what if I had a link to the program or a paid offer in the lead magnet? Like in the physical download, right? So a lot of people will have promotions in that physical download where perhaps consent hasn't been given yet.
Well, they're not receiving, you're not collecting any additional personal data from them other than what was required to fill out for your freebie. So I'd say, I mean, again, this is like one of those things where we're coming up with this as we go along, because yeah, until this gets enforced, we really have no clue. But off the top of my head, I would say that because they have essentially, like, I know this is like the dorkiest thing ever, but essentially you have to think about it like, if somebody fills out your little opt-in form on your website and requests something, that's like them requesting to enter into a contract with you, and then you sending your freebie is fulfilling a contract, which is actually one of the lawful bases under the GDPR. So I would say that if something is included in your freebie, that's different. What we're talking about is like sending them additional emails or processing their data. Yeah, or processing their data in a different way that they weren't aware of, because the point is they have to be made aware of exactly how you're going to process their information at the time that they opt in. And so I think Lori and I are going to talk about that after, but that's where the privacy policy would also become very important for this person's question, because in your privacy policy, it should probably say something about that too.
Yeah, and we're going to get into also, we'll let Elan do his thing, but then we'll also get into, because I had a lot of these questions. Well, can I market to them in my Facebook group? What if they didn't give consent?
Well, you're not holding on to their data.
Exactly. So, and we'll talk about that, because
that's Facebook's problem.
That's Facebook's problem. They're yeah, totally. But we'll get into that. So Elan, so let me actually, before you go, let me just share what we're going to do, and then you can walk people through sort of the high level of like how to get started with this. So what we decided for my community, for my company, is number one, we've combed my database. So we've gone through my entire email list, and we've applied a tag to groups of people who are from the EU, like all the places and also where we had no geographic data from. So we have two groups of people that I now have to send emails to get consent, right? Yeah? Did you want to say something?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So to get consent. So we're going to send 3 emails leading up to May 24th to those two groupings of people, just explaining, what's happening, and hopefully they'll want to stay on my list. I might include some type of like bonus to say, but you can't even do that. I can't like bribe them with the link, but they're going to not be on my list anyway afterwards. So it doesn't really matter. As a bonus for staying on my list, here's what you'll get. They have to actually click the link. You can't do it in absence of, right? So normally what we would say is do nothing and you'll stay on my list. But now we have to say you have to click the link to provide consent. And I'm going to outline every single thing that I could potentially be marketing to them. So like all of my programs, all affiliates, my event, you have to be very forthcoming with the kind of emails that they're going to get. So we promote the podcast, we do this, we do that, we do the other thing, which we will also link to my privacy policy because that will be there too. And so we will have 3 emails. I'll probably send one like around May 20th-ish, and then like 2, probably like 1 or 2, maybe 3, 23rd and 24th. And then whoever does not click the link, and we will know because once they click the link, a tag will be applied that says consent given or whatever the tag is. And anyone who has not clicked the link, which I'm sure will be thousands of people, sadly, at that point, we have to delete them. Like we can't even hold their information in my database. And you have to do it before May 25th because you have to do it like on the 24th. So that's what we're going to do in terms of making sure that we're compliant. That's what we're going to do to get compliant. And then moving forward, what we're going to do to ensure we remain compliant is anytime we have a lead magnet or a challenge or a webinar or a promotion, we basically send the contractual content. So let's say they sign up for a webinar, right? We have the webinar. And after that immediate response, we're going to then send emails explaining that in order for them to stay on my email list after the webinar is over, they will have to give consent. And again, we will outline everything. So it's not like I can't send those push to show emails. I can because that is attached to the webinar. But they have to know that after the webinar is over, I can no longer communicate with them unless they give me consent to. So someone subscribes to my lead magnet, they will get the immediate response. They will get the 1-day follow-up, and then we will pause the automation. We will send the consent emails. There will likely be 3 of them. We will send consent emails and maybe even 1. I don't know if you can do 3.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Anyway, we'll have to look into that. At least 1 email to ask for consent. If they hit the consent link, they will get a tag. Then they will be moved into the sequence, whether it's the nurture sequence or whatever sales funnel they were meant to go into after. So as long as, from what we understand, as long as we get consent before we move them into the next phase, we're okay. So that's what we're going to do, which honestly makes it really frustrating for launches, right? Because we're going to launch, let's say, the Academy in June. We now have to go and change all of our sequences and make sure that we're capturing that information so that if they are registering for the 5-day challenge, we get consent on day 6, right? To continue to promote to them. Now, I will say that the other thing that we're going to do, so 1 is how we're getting ready. So I just told you. 2 is how we're moving forward. 3, I am excluding in my Facebook ads the entire EU. I don't even want to market to them. I'm just going to exclude them. which sucks. It's just the way it is. The UK is leaving. It's fine. Like, I will just exclude in my Facebook advertising all EU people. Now, the problem is it's any undisclosed location. So if for whatever reason the IP address isn't getting picked up, I'm probably going to lose that lead, because I'm going to assume most people aren't going to consent. They've subscribed for a lead magnet, they got the thing that they wanted, and they, you know, like, they may or may not want to continue to hear from you. So it sucks. It's just the way that it is. So those are the 3 things that we're doing to get ready to move forward, and I'm excluding from my Facebook advertising moving forward. So do you want to show the people what to do?
Yes. So yeah, that's great. And again, it's important to remember, I know we're talking about like all the people, but again, as Lori mentioned earlier, it's just people in the EU. So if you're not even marketing the people in the EU, you have no plan on bringing on clients to the EU, yes, you still have to make sure that your privacy policies and your practices are in place, but it's not as big of a deal as, you know, someone like, you know, say Lori, who has like a very large list where that, you know, is all over the world, and you know it's very difficult to kind of manage that. So just keep that into context as we go through that. So as Sam mentioned, let me share my screen here, make sure I'm good to go. So a cool thing that Sam mentioned was that in ConvertKit, now I don't typically use ConvertKit, but the ConvertKit now has these conditions that will actually tag the people, or actually like separate people based off of, or show them, you know, those checkboxes based off of where they are. Now, not all the systems will be able to do this. Like Lori said, a lot of the big technology companies, they're actually scrambling to catch up and to put better technology in place to capture location data and to have different types of conditional content, like Sam described with her optional checkboxes to EU. But really, first thing you have to do, especially if you have any kind of list, is you have to segment, as Sam mentioned. So I know a lot of people within Lori's community use Active Campaign, so we will focus on Active Campaign. However, if you're using like a MailChimp, if you're using an Aweber, they all, for the most part, will bring in that location data whenever they're able to, and you can always segment from platform to platform on location. So what I'm going to do quickly is show you how, if you have an existing list and you're not sure if you have EU people or maybe you have blank locations, this is what you would do. So in Active Campaign, for example, you're going to want to pull up your contacts. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I removed everyone's last name and emails, so I'm not sharing this on this live Facebook call. And you can see here that I have all kinds of locations. So Ontario, Alberta, California, Georgia. Here's one from Great Britain. So this is all over the place. It's all over the board. But you know, there's over 2,000 contacts here, and it would be next to impossible to try and, you know, download it and make sense of it all, unless you're like an Excel guru, and I assume most of the people listening to this are not. So you'll also notice that some of the locations actually just have this dash. So that's what Lori was talking about when she said we don't have any location data. So Stephanie, Dillis, you know, unfortunately, you know, chances are they're probably in Canada or the US, but we have to treat these people as people that we just don't know where they are. So the first thing you want to do when it comes to segmenting your list is creating the actual segment. So in Active Campaign, and a lot of you guys might not know this, but if you click on Search Contacts, there's an option for Advanced Search in the top right-hand corner, okay? And the Advanced Search allows us to create all kinds of crazy segments. I'm not going to create all, you know, 28 EU countries in my actual segmentation. I'm just going to guide you through like the general steps. So once this comes up, you're going to click on Select a Condition. You're going to click on Geography, and then you're going to click on Country. And the first thing we're going to want to do is just put nothing there. So that's for all the people that we don't know who it is. So if I just went and clicked Search, this is going to pull up from our database everyone who has nothing entered into the location. So at this point, based off of how Lori is segmenting her list into unknown locations and then EU locations, right, Lori? You would want to edit all, and then you'd want to add a tag to all these people. Now, what that tag name, like what's the naming sequence you're using, Laurie? Like just unknown or unknown location, whatever
I
really
think so. I think it's unknown location.
unknown location. So whatever makes sense to you, this will at least allow you to easily segment them further without having to do these advanced searches. So that would be the first step I would do. The second step I would do is create another advanced search, but this time you would have to literally list, just to be sure, every single EU country. And if you're not sure about the EU countries, just do a quick Google search. There's 28 of them. I pulled up a list here, europa.eu. Basically, what you would have to do is go through here and go Austria. You'd add in Austria, then you'd add in another condition if the country is Austria, or if the country is, let's say, Belgium, and so forth and so forth. So you would have this huge segmentation segment that we build, and then when you click search, it will literally just pull in all those people that have one of those countries that Active Campaign has actually identified. So I'm not going to go here and add 28 of them because I want to respect everyone's time and I know everyone's busy. But what this will essentially allow us to do, and let me just put in the United Kingdom because that should pull a bunch of people. And let me just hit search. So now what's going to happen is this is going to look in our database, and it's actually pulled out 73 contacts of over 2,000 that we can now tag as EU citizens. So these will be the first people that we would want to start getting consent for, explicit consent. Now, it's important to remember that we have up until the 24th, right? So we could be hitting these people up as much as possible. And you might not, I know Laurie's waiting till, the 20th and so forth, but there's nothing stopping you from doing this now. I mean, the longer that you start mailing people about this, the more of a chance you'll actually get their attention and get their explicit consent. So that would be the very first step in regards to actual segmentation. Did you want me to go through some of like the other tricks as like ongoing tagging, Lori? Because you can do some pretty cool things within Active Campaign.
Yeah, sure. I just also want to for the people that are watching, this is painful. This is not, I'm sitting here and I'm trying to remember that we're live so I don't have resting bitch face as Elan goes through this. It's annoying. It's painful. No, Europe isn't enough. So you need to literally go through your entire database and literally add tags for all 28 EU countries plus undisclosed location. And you need to have the tags for those people because just putting the tag Europe, it's not sufficient.
No, I think, well, you can actually tag them all as EU citizen.
The tag is, but if you search Europe, it's not enough.
No, yeah, because Europe won't come in under the location typically by default. Mm-hmm. So you just want to make sure that, you have every country. That will make 100% sure that you do not miss one single contact.
Yeah.
It depends too on the service provider you're using, because I sent out to all my clients some instructions. I use ConvertKit and they give you the tag for European Union. So they've condensed all this for you. So you don't have to go through. Mm-hmm. And then I know I had clients on Aweber and a couple of other platforms that had a similar thing. So just check to make sure.
Just make sure. Yeah. If you use the search term European Union and there's 3 people.
Right.
And your list is 3,000, then it's probably not sufficient.
Right.
The other thing I just want to say too, and again, we didn't give the disclaimer. I mean, Sam was a lawyer, but we're not proficient in this. We're just giving you the information that we've discovered. But I will also just say, they're not looking for us. The GDPR people aren't looking for us. That doesn't mean that we don't have to be compliant. I just don't want you to have a complete and utter meltdown that this is coming and this is happening and you have to do it. It is annoying. We all have to do it, but just also take it with ease because they're not looking, they're not looking for people, they're not looking for us. That doesn't mean that we won't, that we're immune to it, because we're not. I'm just trying breathe through it.
Yeah, and there still is a lot of gray area. So I just quickly modified it because this was not here before. This must be one of the new updates that Active Campaign has added as well. So if you just go country is Europe and do an advanced search like that, it will actually pull up, I see here we have people in Moscow, Great Britain, I think that's Spain, Italy. So that should be sufficient. If you really want to make sure, then you can actually segment it by country to country, but that will take a long time. So that would be how you would initially segment your list for an existing list. But then the challenge becomes what happens to ongoing clients. We don't want to have to do this all the time. We want to try and automate this as much as possible. So you can actually do that through automations. And I'm going to just jump in there quickly so you guys get an idea of how this can be done. So typically when we're building an automation, what we'll typically do in Active Campaign at least is we'll set up the trigger. So how will people get added to the list or added to this automation? It's typically when they subscribe to an actual list itself. I created a test list just for this this presentation called Ziggy Media EU. But the nice thing about Active Campaign is you can actually segment people when they come into the list, which is pretty cool. So we can say when someone subscribes to this list, and it could be any list that triggers it, we can then segment geography, country is Europe. So this will only run for people who are actually in Europe. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I don't see the actual questions on my screen.
I'm watching. It's good. You're good so far.
Yeah. So once this happens, we know only people that are not that have the country EU will actually get access to this automation. If they don't, they won't even come in. And you could even flip it around. It could say is not Europe. So this could be all people outside of Europe get the automation. And if you want to go even further, and if you can even fork your automation by using an if and else. So let me just back up because the funny thing is there's so many different ways to do this, and I was kind of thinking about what would be the easiest way. But let's jump back and say we're gonna trigger this automation when someone subscribes to a list. What we could do is, and we can actually put an if and else statement. So if geography country is Europe, let's go down and find Europe. And what will happen is Active Campaign will actually give us two paths. So is it Europe? Yes. If it is, then you can actually send a specific email with that explicit consent. If they're not, then you could just treat them as you would any other specific, any other lead in your database as you are right now. That would be a good way of how you can actually change things based off of where people are. Or you can even have it where, as Lori mentioned, you can create an automation where it actually gets triggered when someone clicks on a link in an email. So for example, if they say, yes, I give consent, and they click on that email, you can actually then tag the people, you can then move them into lists, you can move them out of lists, and that's how you can automate the whole movement of your contacts and their data. I hope that makes sense.
Can I just regurgitate?
Sure.
Okay. So you're going to use the if-else rule, which I think is the smartest way to do it. So
it's definitely the easiest.
I think it's the easiest. So somebody subscribes, let's say, we'll do two examples because a webinar is a little trickier. So somebody subscribes to like your PDF lead magnet, right? When they subscribe, you have a rule in there that they get searched basically if they're from Europe or undisclosed location is what I would do. And then everyone else. So if they are from Europe and undisclosed location, they go to the left. And then if they're everyone else, they go to the right. That's people right. On the left, if Europe and undisclosed location or nothing selected is the case, whatever it is, they get the immediate response email. And then you can set the rest of the automation to make sure that they are getting sent the consent emails. So the consent email would come after the delivery of the lead magnet.
Mm-hmm.
And in that consent email would be like the full detail of what's needed, which we'll go through after with Sam, and the link that says you need to consent, click here. When it gets clicked, you can even just add a tag that they're like EU consent given, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then when consent is given, they are then just moved into the rest of the regularly sequenced automation.
Yes, and like just doing something like this to split the automation by using an if or else, if country is blank, or if the country is in Europe, that will actually fork it, and then all the people on the yes path can then go to maybe a consent automation or a specific IR with explicit consent listed in that. If not, then we can assume that they're not in the EU and that we have their location, and they are good to just follow up with. Yeah, I think that would really be the easiest way, because there are a million different ways that you can segment and how you can actually tag and do those different kinds of things within Active Campaign and all these other email marketing softwares. But it's really whatever makes sense for your business, and just to make sure that you're not skipping over anyone. So.
Okay, so let's talk about webinar, because webinar is a bit different. So with the webinar, they subscribe to the webinar. They get the immediate response basically with the confirmation saying, here's your webinar details. And then what we teach is you have this like nurture, push to show sequence, right? So Sam, correct me if I'm wrong. We can go through. So this is like the hard part, right? Because you're going to pitch them on the webinar.
But have they, so in this example, like, I mean, they know they're signing up for a webinar, right?
Yeah, they know they're signing up for the webinar, but they don't necessarily know that they're going to be pitched, because then it's like you're moving them to a new contract in the webinar.
Oh, you mean like pitching within the webinar?
Yeah, pitching within the webinar.
Well, really, I mean, you've gotten them, what your offer, right? So like contracts are like offer acceptance and and then like the thing that's offered. So your offer was to attend this webinar. Once you've attended the webinar, like this is kind of like the example the person asked about, like having a link in their freebie. Like you're not taking their personal data and doing anything else with it. You're just like making a pitch at the end of a free webinar, most likely. And so like if they want to, like for example, sign up for a free call with someone after a webinar, or like email you about it and learn more, or sign up for the actual product or program itself, like that would be them entering into another contract.
Another new contract of which consent is given because they've done the next action.
That's what I would think at that point.
Okay. So then that's what I thought too. So people subscribe to the webinar, they get the confirmation email, they go through the nurture, push to show up sequence for the webinar. You have the webinar. Then you have to get consent. You cannot send them any further email that promotes the program, because now you're using their email in a different way to a new contract. So if you want to send any sales emails, or even the replay that has sales content within that email, like expressly in the email, you have to get their consent. So if you want to send a replay, just send the replay. Don't put links anywhere. Just because I think that would be sort of crossing the line.
I think that's where the tags would really come in handy, because you could send just the replay to anyone tagged as being located within the EU or unknown, and then send like your full shebang to everybody else.
Yes, yes. So after you do the webinar, that's where you have to get consent. Right? I mean, you could totally also get consent at opt-in.
Unless you already had it, right? Yeah, from opt-in.
Unless you already had it from like a previous time, and you only have to get consent once.
Right. And then maybe too, like maybe the person who attends your webinar already downloaded your freebie, or like did something else where they've opted in. So there might be other cases where you, like, they might already be tagged. That's why this tagging thing is so important, because then you can really just track everybody like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you could see my screen still, because while you guys were chatting there, I kind of just changed up this automation. Something like this could just run on autopilot 24/7. So what this is doing is anytime anyone subscribes to any of your lists, we do the check, If they are, we just tag them EU citizen. If not, then we just end the automation. And this is actually always running. Every time someone comes into your database, this will actually automatically tag them, and we'll just make it super easy to do follow-ups for that automation. So there's different ways that we can apply those, and it's important that we remember that. Another thing that I just want to make note of, specifically with Active Campaign, is they allow you to do something called conditional content within emails, where we can actually show blocks of content based off of people's geography. So you can actually have one email that has conditional content, and it will actually show this content only to people in Europe, which would eliminate having to do multiple emails and automations. And it's really not that difficult to do it. It's the same way as we would do this. And if you want, Lori, I can actually quickly show people how to do that.
Sure, go ahead.
It's actually kind of cool.
It is kind of cool.
It's actually really cool, and a lot of people don't know you can even do it. And you can actually do conditional content based on anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and create an email. I'm going to use, let's use this one just for the sake of this presentation. So basically, when you're in the email builder with an Active Campaign, it actually allows you to create these content blocks. And if you hover over them, these are actual content blocks. So I can actually take a text block, I can drag it in here. I could say, this is text for EU people, whatever you want that to be. In most cases, it will be a link. Sam, would that be sufficient for consent?
No.
Yeah, just saying this is for EU people. I'm laughing because that's what I've been calling them, EU
Right.
people.
Yeah. Apologies for any
Yeah, I know,
people
that's
in
what
the
I've been
European Union right now.
Yeah.
But basically, once you have like these blocks, you can say, you click on this little gear and you say make conditional. And then it basically will allow us to find their country, geo country, equals to Europe. Now, how cool is that?
That's awesome.
And what will happen now is if they are considered to Europe, it will actually show this. If they're not, it will just get omitted from the actual email itself. So
That's amazing.
So many different ways that you can kind of comply, and there's just so much gray area right now. And I'm sure Sam will attest to that, people are still trying to figure this out. And, a lot of these big email marketing companies have been not scrambling. They knew it was coming, but now it's really knocking on the door, and they can see that, how it's kind of affecting, their bottom line and how people will be able to market using their system. So super important to get in line.
I think what's really cool, Elon, about what you just showed everybody, if they can do this, if you have that functionality, is that you could make it super easy on yourself to just have your delivery email have a box that only showed to people. So if you didn't have the option that I was talking about with ConvertKit, where like my checkboxes only show up on my opt-in forms to EU people, then you could have that box only show up to EU people, where it would say like, hey, now that you have this awesome freebie, like want to receive future email messages from me. And this was another thing I wanted to mention to you both to see if you wanted to address it now, was that I think there's some question as to also whether you're just getting affirmative consent, like you're not just saying like, hey, want to get more emails from me, like that's not enough, right? So I'm breaking this down into two categories, like whatever you want to call it, advertising or marketing or promotional messages, whatever you kind of want to call that. I would also though encourage you to further describe that, like receive special promotions, like notice of sales, blah, 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 like special offers to join my program. Like if you already know what you're going to email them about, I would put that. But then I'm also including a second link that's like, click here if you just want to receive my weekly newsletter or like whatever you guys call it. And then I'm going to create one that's just like, you're okay with both. Or maybe they could even click both, whatever it does, I'll tag them either way. But I don't know what you guys think about that from a
That's a really good idea.
But that's what I'm doing in ConvertKit. So I have GDPR consent to advertising, GDPR consent to newsletter list. So that then if like, it's possible that somebody just likes my like random musings every week, but they don't necessarily want to be pitched products. And for anybody listening who has that thought, which I totally don't blame you, where you're like, I don't care if anybody from Europe buys my stuff, like how many people are going to do it. This would be another great reason, because maybe they're not going to buy your stuff, but they enjoy reading your emails. And so if you don't want to delete people unnecessarily, like you never know when somebody's going to become a client, that's, to me, another marketing way to do it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I didn't think about that. Elan, do you have any final words before you jump off? Because I know you got.
No, I still have about 5-10 minutes if there's any
Okay.
questions. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, if you use conditional content within the emails, it just eliminates the need to have to create multiple emails, pretty much doing the same thing. So look into that, because you can even see here. So like we created one for special promotions link, and then click this link for training webinars. So I guess the next question is okay, someone clicks on the link, how do we actually tag people? So I can actually show that quickly to people. You can actually trigger automations in Active Campaign. If you go add, and let me actually set up a new automation so I don't confuse people. I'll just go to new automation. So you can actually start an automation within Active Campaign based on a link click. So as Sam just mentioned, if you have, promotions, maybe training webinars, maybe, just general newsletters and advice, you're going to want to get affirmative consent for each of them. But then what you could do is you can trigger automations to happen when someone clicks a link in an email. So that would be this one. We would click on that, and then we would actually select the email, and we wouldn't say any email. We would find the email, and we would find the link. So it would actually be listed here. And then what we could do is set up this automation to actually tag people, to maybe move them to a list. Maybe it's, we can just, it could be as simple as tagging them that EU consent given. So it could really be as complicated or as non-complicated as you want it to be. But what I would recommend is just try and keep it simple. The majority of the people on this call probably don't have tens of thousands of people on their mailing list. Maybe it's a few hundred. And if you do have people that you sell to or, market to within the EU, then definitely keep your ears open. If not, you should definitely be paying attention and, maybe take a look at your list, try segmenting it, see what percentage of your list is actually in the European Union, because, we just showed you how to do that. And whether you're using the MailChimp, Aweber, they should all allow you to be able to see who's where, or whether you don't have any location data as well.
Amazing.
I also wanted to point out important marketing note here about the GDPR is like, I've been getting a lot of emails that are like, I don't specifically advertise or market to
Doesn't
people.
matter.
Like, I don't even care if they get on my list. The point is, like, the way that the internet works, anybody can get on your list, right? So like, as long, all you need to be thinking about here is not really what your intent is. It's more the fact that if anyone from the EU can get onto your list or really even browse your site, then you have to be worried about this stuff. And frankly,
Yes.
you had to be anyway because of California. So if anybody from California can browse your site or opt into your list, you had to be worried about this stuff already anyway.
One thing that I wanted to also know that I read, and Sam, you might have heard of this as well. A lot of people are saying, oh, you know what, the UK, they're exiting the EU, so we don't have to worry about that. But from what I've heard, once they do exit, they will have similar privacy laws. So in terms of how you handle their data, so you can pretty much bucket them in with everyone else for now, and then if things change down the road, then you can always remove those people.
Yeah, Brexit's such a thing that like for right now, I'm saying to operate under assuming they're in. Later, you can always use the suggestions that Elon taught you to go in and tag people in the UK and kind of remove them and do what you need to do then. But I would say until then, I just operate under that.
Yeah, just anyone in the European Union and undisclosed locations. And believe me, it pains me. We had 5,600 people in undisclosed locations. So plus people from the EU. So I totally get it. Thank you, Elan, so much for showing us those like super simple and really cool ways to do it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you guys are freaking out, you can always just go back and watch the replay because it's a Facebook Live, so it'll just live on the page that you're watching it on now. So I know we did that kind of super quick, but you can always go back and like literally pause the video, do the action that he's showing you, and just set it up that way.
One question that I had, and I might be stealing your thunder, Lori, it was for Sam. What should we be doing with our privacy policies?
Yeah, so that's a big one. So we so far have focused on like getting people into our list, but the one big area we haven't talked about is that when we're bringing those people on, even if we're doing all this stuff that Elon showed you, or like some of the things that I brought up, they actually have to be provided, let's say, notice, for lack of a better term, of like how you process their information and what you do with it at the time that they consent. So if you're doing that as a checkbox, for example, on your form, then that has to be on the form. So like a link to my privacy policy also has to be there. They can't find out about it later. Or if it's like a form that's built into my website, my privacy policy is on my site. If you're doing this through the delivery emails Elon just showed you, there should always be a link to the privacy policy there, etc. So wherever you're doing this, like we're talking now about spreading your privacy policy around. I've been emailing the people who have my privacy policy template to let them know, like, don't be afraid to make multiple versions of this. If you have certain like different areas of your business, like I have an online course, for example, that privacy policy is going to be different than the one that's on my site selling DIY legal templates. So don't be afraid to like go in and change some of the language. But some of the big things that you guys should know in terms of your privacy policy and like what should be in it. Really, hopefully, if you already have like a legit privacy policy as it is, the stuff for the most part is already there. But like letting people know exactly who they need to contact. So I like doing that right up front in the beginning of the privacy policy. Like if you have any questions about how we handle your personal information, contact Sam at samvandermeulen.com, or whoever it is that people should contact. You should let them know what kind of information you collect from them, where on your site you collect it. Most important under the GDPR is like letting them know who you share that information with. So there's a difference here between selling off information, which is like what happens to me when I sign up for something, and then all of a sudden you start getting like emails and texts from all these.
You're on the damn list somewhere.
Yeah, so most of you are probably not doing that. Those are like big companies that are sharing and selling your information. I think for us, the bigger issue is actually maybe some of the stuff we don't think about. So for example, if you use Active Campaign, you're sharing personal information with Active Campaign in order to send out all of your emails, right? Or if you use like Zapier, for example, Zapier now has access to that personal information that you're collecting. So under the GDPR, we don't actually have to list out like Zapier, ConvertKit, Active Campaign. We don't have to list them out. We have to list them in categories. So I'm doing this by kind of generally saying like web providers, email marketing service providers, like you can go through and list them out because we might all change providers too. So you have to do that. And then there are 6 rights that people have under the GDPR that you have to lift out very specifically. And you also have to let everybody know what your legal basis is for collecting their information. So remember, we talked about consent. That's the one we really focused on today, because that's the one that so many of us are going to focus on. But there's also a bunch of other legal bases that you could argue. But I think for most of you, you're going to be arguing consent because you're doing all the cool stuff that they're teaching you today. And then you might also say to fulfill a contract, because maybe somebody like me, for example, I sell legal templates. People go on and buy my templates who I've never talked to before and who are not on my list. So I didn't have their personal information until they bought my stuff. So for me, in that case, I'm now taking their information, putting them on my list. That's because I'm fulfilling a contract. So that's like a totally different animal. So that's pretty much what needs to be.
But if you do that,
mm-hmm.
They buy something from you, you've given it to them, contract fulfilled. You cannot then add them to your list and just start marketing to them.
No, and I'm in a different situation because like for the most part, I don't know why people from the EU would really be buying my stuff because they're American like driven contract templates.
But even still, just as
different. But for other people, it's like if you were selling a program or something like that, yes, technically speaking, that does not mean that you can just start marketing anything and everything to them, or even add them to your general newsletter list,
which
is why I'm breaking it down, because maybe like also that's the other thing, like so maybe now somebody buys all this stuff from you, like they might not want to get promotional emails from you, but they want to hear from you and learn more information. So that's why I'm breaking it down into like a paid / non-paid kind of tagging system.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks, Elon.
Was that helpful, Elon?
Yes, that was a great answer.
All right. I know it's a lot, but
awesome. Are you guys going to keep rocking and rolling here?
Yeah, we're going to keep going for a little bit.
Awesome. So thank you. And yeah, if anyone has any questions specifically about how to implement this within your tech platform, feel free to hit me up in the Facebook group. I'd be happy to try and help you out. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Sam. And good luck, everyone, with GDPR.
Thanks.
We need like a GDPR support group.
Oh, I feel.
Okay, so there's a couple questions before we continue. So Aaron's saying, but surely if someone opts into all mails about current or future programs, then you would be compliant.
No, I don't think so, unfortunately. Hate to tell you.
So let's break down the example because someone else asked me this too. So let's say on your website, you have an opt-in that says, subscribe to my newsletter, right?
Yeah.
Subscribe just to my newsletter. Okay, so they've subscribed to your newsletter. There's no opt-in, so that's cool. But you can't send them any other information other than what would be contained within that newsletter.
Yeah, the GDPR requires like explicit and unambiguous consent. So, first of all, I'm sure that Lori would yell at you and tell you not to be using language like join my newsletter because it's like super generic anyway. Yeah, but I have gotten that question a lot too. Like, I'm going to just revert back to saying that because it sounds easier. It's actually not. I mean, yes, you would be able to email them your like weekly musings, but
who cares? You're still not going to be able to sell them anything.
You can't build a business on weekly musics. So, which would be nice, but you can't.
Right.
So in the meantime, because the GDPR requires this like unambiguous consent, you have to think of this stuff in terms of categories. So I've been encouraging my clients to think about the categories of emails they send out. So like, I mean, really I can think of two, which are like the general newsletter emails, those are the musings we're talking about. And then the second would be the advertising, marketing, sales, right? Stuff like that. And I would try to jazz it up. Personally, I'm no marketing expert, but I would jazz it up by saying like, I send my list exclusive stuff like that nobody else sees. They get the best deals, the pre-wait list, whatever. Like you can tell them a bit more about it. You can make it enticing, but you just have to be very clear.
Yeah. So and that I really appreciate that suggestion that you gave before, because I didn't even think about that, because and funny enough, that's actually how we even segment in my back end anyway. We have different sequences for free content, affiliate promotions, and sales and launches. So you have to be really explicit as to what you're sending, what you're like, categories is good. So the way that I was thinking about it is like, everything is like it's like a contract. So whatever's not listed within that contract you can't touch. So if you are promoting your lead magnet and you then send an additional emails to like promote anything else, that's off limits. Now, the questions that I was researching yesterday, let me just go back and make sure. So Kathy's saying, do I need their consent to send them a birthday gift as a PDF?
Yeah, so I would say, Kathy, if you collected that personal information, which is their birthday, in their like opting in for something different, then I would say yes. I would probably describe, like if that's like a cornerstone thing of your business, like something specifically that you do, like I was thinking about this the other day, just to give you an example. For me, I send a handwritten note and gift to everybody who buys templates. So like that's something specific because I take their address and I actually do something with it, right? So I'm mentioning that specifically
yes, you have to say that.
Yeah, so like, if you know this birthday thing is important to you, I would say that. Like, you guys have seen this before, like when a lot of restaurants will do this, like, do you consent to receiving like a birthday gift from us or something? I would say something like that.
Everything that you want to do. Okay, so the way that the GDPR explains it is there's data collector and data processor, right?
We're a collector.
Pardon?
We're collectors. All of us are
we're the collector, and Active Campaign, Facebook, things like that, they're the processor, right? But the responsibility, it falls on both of us, but if you're collecting information, you have to expressly tell them what it's used for, and they have to give consent, period, right? So for example, we send out packages from the WBA, we collect their mailing address, they have to give us consent because I've collected their data. They have to give consent for any way that is different from the original contract for me to use the data.
Yep.
Right? So they make a purchase, their mailing address comes with that purchase, that fulfills that contract. But now I'm asking them to send them a physical thing in the mail. I'm using their information that I collected at point of purchase for a different purpose. I have to get their consent. Maybe this is like, I think this would be great because it actually fulfills the original contract within the purchase.
Yeah.
Because it's specific to the program. But let's say if I wanted to mail them an invitation to the Wellness Business Summit, that's not allowed.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, and remember, we're only talking here, if whoever's listening to this is not located in the EU, we're only talking about the fact that you need to do this stuff with the people who are located within.
Exactly. It's not everybody.
But at the same time, you know, just remember that, like, basically when we boil this down in a very non-lawyery way, the GDPR gives people located within the EU basically the right to know, like, exactly what the heck you're doing with their information. So that's the whole point. So if you just think about everything from that point of view, like, if someone downloads this freebie, would they know that they would also be receiving this, this, and this? And to be perfectly honest with you, like, the US system is like really, and the Canadian system, it's like really liberal with this stuff. Like, just because somebody gets your freebie, now they start to get all this stuff from you. So
totally. It's a bait and switch for sure.
Yeah, totally. And so remember that, like, this is the whole point about the GDPR, is that they're giving them the right to know exactly what they're getting themselves into. So just approach every situation that way.
Okay, so there's two more questions. Mm-hmm. So Anna Marie is asking and this is a really good one. One question I have is within my newsletter, I use it to talk about all sorts of things from what's coming up on Facebook Lives, webinars that are coming to, cool resources, not necessarily mine, and musings. What if, as a part of the newsletter announcements, we wanted to announce that there will be a Mother's Day flash sale? Are we technically not allowed to do that now? You're right, we're not.
Well, the point would just be to get the consent. I mean, once you have this system set up that we've all talked about today, you would just be emailing that to people who you already have the consent of in the
right.
Yeah, everybody else
you only. Again, it's not to everybody. It's just to EU and undisclosed locations. So specific to that, if, for example, that's where using something like Active Campaign, where the show hide of the content would be really cool. So, for example, in this circumstance, I'm just going back to read it, where, so first of all, they've opted in for the lead magnet. In order to continue to send them your newsletters with any of that content, they would have had to give consent either to just receive your email newsletter, as the example Sam gave, or also receive your marketing, of which you've detailed out the ways you're going to use it. Yeah. So if they've just given consent to receive your email newsletter, then you guys make sure that you hide any sales promotions from anyone that has the EU tag. Just hide it.
Yeah, I mean, if it were me, like, if you had Active Campaign, this I think is much more straightforward because you guys can go in there and, like, hide that information. I think if it were me, that once you get this set up and you followed, like, the steps, and we can, like, recap the steps at the end if anybody wants to, because I have, like, 4 simple steps you can go through. Right. But basically, once you get all that stuff set up, then I would just say that in the future, you should basically be, like, emailing your list, exclude all the people from the EU, but for people who have consented. Like, that's, like, a straightforward way I would do that. So then that email that would be going out would be like, who cares? The people who've consented from the EU, they'll be included, and the people who haven't won't. If you have an Active Campaign, then do the, like, the.
But I think the example was if they've only consented to getting the newsletter.
Then no, you can't. Not if they're in the EU. No, that's the point. And that's why I would do it through the tagging system, though, because then you don't have to, like, worry about it, because now you can just exclude them or include them depending on consent.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, so Jess is asking, so when they purchase my book, I send them my book, then I delete their info. You don't have to, you just have to get their consent.
Yeah, you don't have to delete them. And so you have to remember, like, the GDPR applies to the processing of personal data. Processing is a very broad term under the GDPR. It includes storing, so which would be like what you're doing, right? When somebody, even if you're not emailing them, even them just being on your list is storing. And deleting is also considered processing. So no, you don't necessarily have to, like, delete them right away, because they had the consent to fulfill the contract, which is how you sent them the book. Now you would just send either in that email. I mean, personally, I would do it in the delivery email, because there is still some question as to whether, like, follow-up emails are okay. So personally, I would do this in the delivery email and just have another link there that if that either only goes to EU people or whatever, however you can set it up. You don't need to send it to everyone. as long as you're not located in the EU. And so I would just have a link there that says like, do you consent to receiving future emails from me?
Yeah. I think the most, like, the important thing to remember is any new action that they were not explicitly informed of has to have consent before you can proceed. Definitely. And if there's no consent, you can't do the thing. Now, the question I had, and I spent like very long time yesterday researching this on Facebook, was, let's say, because most of us promote our Facebook groups. So it's promoted on the thank you page after they subscribe. And then it's also promoted in the immediate response. It's potentially promoted in the lead magnet. So I was like, well, what if they don't give consent to continue to market, but now they're in my Facebook group and I'm marketing my programs in my Facebook group? So the research that I found at that point, it's actually okay, because Facebook acts in that instance as both the collector and the processor.
Yeah, because the person can get out of your group and you don't really have their personal data. Like, they're not holding
I don't have their personal data. I'm not storing it. It's Facebook.
Right. If Facebook's holding it and they can get out of it. It's also a free group. So yeah, I guess you're marketing stuff to them. But I would think, I mean, this really applies to how we process.
The collector process.
Yeah. The controllers were called by the
controller.
GDPR.
Right. So, that's what I meant.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like that's the kind of the only stuff that you have to worry about is what you're.
So let's take it one step further, because I asked this question. I hope you guys are smart. Those of you that use custom audiences, you better be asking this question. Yeah. I asked the question.
You should have called me, by the way.
Pardon?
You should have called me. I would have told you.
No, well, I just was curious because I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but on mobile, like the GDPR thing on Facebook's popping up. So I was like, okay, what do they have to tell me? So here's the thing. So I was like, cool. I don't care if you're on your list. I got you, sucker. Like, I'm going to upload you to a custom audience. Can't do that. Nope, off limits. So in my head, I was like, okay, cool. Like, you're not consenting, but I still have your personal information. Is it fair game to upload it into as a custom audience and then market on Facebook? And so the research that I did on Facebook is no, because I am giving personal information to Facebook to use for marketing. Facebook didn't get the personal information on its own. I'm physically transferring the data.
Right. That would be my instinct as well. Yeah. That also reminds me that I have gone ahead and already updated my privacy policy template to include a pixels section.
Yes, let's talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I already had a cookies section, which is like standard, because we're basically all collecting cookies, whether you know it or not, even if we don't understand what the heck they are. But for the rest of us too, who are using pixels, so if you or your web designer on your behalf has dropped a pixel on your site, your landing pages, maybe like I have one on my course page to know like who's visiting, who's clicking to buy and doesn't buy, all that good stuff. You should now include that language in your privacy policy, because that's considered controlling the personal data as well, because now I know like who's visiting what and where and when and all that kind of stuff. So
wouldn't like a good privacy policy already include that? We already have how we use cookies and how to get rid of cookies and all that stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, the problem that I run into is before people work with me, they've generally stolen somebody else's privacy policy and like copy and pasted it to their own, or they've used some like kind of free privacy policy generator. And those do not cover people in online businesses. It doesn't include all this stuff that we all do. So that's kind of where I come in and where I try to help out is like my stuff covers all the stuff that we're actually doing in real online businesses.
Cool. Okay. So Luann is asking, so the consent does not necessarily have to be given when they opt in, but they can give it for further emails in the welcome email they first receive with their free download.
Oh, right. Yes, Luann, that's correct. True. And then you just want to remember that whenever it is that you give consent, whether it's at the initial opt-in or in the email, there has to be a link to the privacy policy, letting them know how you handle the personal information, and specifically for the GDPR, advising them of these 6 very important rights that they have under the GDPR.
Yes, exactly. So Jessica's saying, so first put them through that automation that Elan described and then add to the custom audience. Yes. So if you have live custom audiences, you just set a rule that no one is added with the EU tag. So for me, we use Entreport as an example. So we're going to just set a rule, basically that's like, do not add anyone with the EU tag to that custom audience within Facebook. And right, like it's really just as simple as that. I just wanted to share that because I was like, oh, a workaround. Nope. And again, too, like, it's only for people in the EU, and sincere apologies. We're talking about you like you don't even exist, or like you're like a widget.
Yeah.
I don't mean any disrespect by any stretch. It's just the way that we're having this conversation. You are real valid people. We're sorry that we're sort of talking about EU people this way. It's just easiest, I think, for us to do that. We mean zero, like no harm, no disrespect in that.
Nope, lovely. I love Europe. Just lived in France for a while.
It's just, we're not, it's just the law that we have to take into consideration. So is there anything else, Sam, that we haven't gone through? Do you want to go through your 4 steps? And then I know that you had some templates that people could access.
Yeah, 2 things I wanted to mention. So I have this list of like things. I have a list because it's so intense, but this list of stuff that's like that we didn't talk about today because it's so unique or specific. So I just want to run through it really quickly before I go over the 4 like major steps I would take, because if you do any of these things that I talk about here in a second, you need to put a little asterisk and like look into this a bit more. You either need to hire a professional, hire your own lawyer, like all that kind of stuff, because there are certain things that people do under the GDPR that like it amps it up a notch, as I keep saying. So for one, if you're located within the EU, one way that this gets amped up a bit is if you transfer personal data outside of the EU. So that might come into play as an example, like you live in France, but you use ConvertKit as your email provider. So now you're transferring the personal information of other people outside the EU. I'm not going to go through that in detail, one, because I don't know how many people on here that applies to, but also I'm an American lawyer and I don't know. That's like a whole nother level of stuff, because, and I wanted to let everyone know that there are sets of rules in the GDPR that apply to that if you do that. So for other like non-EU people, so for the rest of us, if you collect the data of children, so I would say, I mean, to be really safe, I'd say under 18 or definitely under 13. Here in the US, that's usually like how we differentiate, is like 13 or under. So if you have some kind of business that like specifically deals and markets to children, that's a whole nother ballgame. So that you have to look into. And then there's this list that's specifically outlined by the GDPR. So if you collect personal data regarding race, politics, religion, trade union membership, genetic data, sex life or sexual orientation, criminal conviction or offenses, or philosophical beliefs, believe it or not, then you have to handle data in a different way. So if you do any of those things, I'd say you have the kind of business where you need professional help, and like this training is definitely not going to be enough for you.
Pause for a second. Do you think, and not to freak anyone out, but do you think that genetic data would also imply health data?
I think that what they're talking about here would be more, I think it would be more technical, because it's really for the purposes of like identification. So like your gene mapping sequence or something. I don't know. I'm like not even technical enough to understand, but I did listen to a podcast the other day that kind of intimated that, the politics and like religion one could be tricky, because you want to remember that this stuff applies to surveys too. So if you send out like surveys to people or post surveys on your site or in a blog post, that's collecting data because you're having people fill out a form. So everything we're talking about today applies to like any form. It doesn't just have to be your email list. Mm-hmm. So if you have like a contact me form or a survey form on your website or a quiz of some sort, you're collecting data, and then you're like doing stuff with that data. And sometimes you have like other personal information. So I could see different kinds of businesses having questions in those quizzes or surveys that might start to drip into like political or religious or something like that. So that's just stuff you want to be aware of. I think also this is a good time to remember that like if you don't need data, don't collect it, because you just don't want excess data for something that you just don't like. If that's not even important to your business and it's just something you had there, like delete it and just don't even deal with it. But I wanted to let everybody know that that was something that they that they definitely made a note of. Transfers of the personal data to third countries, genetic or biometric data, businesses with over 250 employees, which I don't think are watching this, and then companies whose core activities include processing large scales of personal data. So those are like the Facebooks, the Googles, the active campaigns, those people.
Where could we get a definition of genetic or biometric data?
I think that should be located in the definition section of the GDPR, which I'm happy to look up after this and then link to.
Okay, because I would be curious. Because I mean, and everyone don't freak out. It's just a matter of consent. That's all. It's not like you can't do it. It's not going to screw everything up, and it's only for the EU and undisclosed.
Well, and remember, one of the legal bases to process information is fulfilling a contract. So if you're a health coach, for example, and you're watching this and you're thinking, well, I collect that to bring my clients on. Well, you're collecting that to fulfill your role as a coach.
Okay.
That would be fine. It's not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good differentiator, and that's a good point. So if you're collecting data and you're using it to fulfill the contract of the purchase, that's fair game.
Yeah.
That's okay. You don't need additional consent.
Yeah, you want to think about all the like freaky deaky things that like Facebook and Google are doing essentially.
Yeah.
Where they're like tracking all these things about us and learning about us and like learning our behaviors and our patterns and our thoughts and everything else. And then they're like doing stuff with it, right? They're selling it to people, they're marketing to us. That's really what this is aimed at. But I just want to go over that.
I just want to pause for just a second. So there's just, I just want to stay on this surveys thing. So again, remember, it's to fulfill a contract, right? And it goes back to the intent of whatever it is. So if, for example, you are doing ideal client avatar surveys and you are collecting someone's name and email and address and phone number for the purposes of, using it in your program, and they're in the EU or have an undisclosed location. You guys, if you're doing ideal client avatar stuff, it like most chances are the person or they're like local to you. If they happen to be in the EU, number one, sadly, just don't use them. And number two, just make sure that they give consent. That's all.
Yeah, you could have it set up in a way where either like on the form itself, like I know Google Forms, you could do this. It would be like, are you located within the EU? Yes, like, oh, you're done until you give me this like consent to take it.
Right.
Or say it in like the email that you send out, but like if you're in the EU, I need you to click here first, or something like that. Yeah.
But if it's like a standalone, let's say you're like, I know a couple people in my community have quizzes that they use on Facebook, right, to market. Just exclude the EU.
Yeah.
In your marketing. Like don't make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. Just exclude the EU. That's all.
Definitely for you people too that are talking about like, I don't even care if people, or I don't think that many people from the EU, like those are the people especially where you should just be, if you really don't care and it's not like a part of your business, or someone like me where my stuff is very specific, like it wouldn't even make sense really for that many people in the EU to buy my stuff. So I would just exclude them. Like it's not worth it to me.
But there are some people in my community for sure who are in the EU.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are in the EU, you need to take extra special precaution to make sure that what you are asking them, that's it. There's no other sort of follow-up. So if you're doing a quiz, as an example, you need to get explicit consent to use that data from that quiz in any way. I guess that's what it means. It's like you have to tell them how you're using the data from the quiz. You can't just say, you gave consent to collect my information. You have to explain, I assume you would have to detail out how you're using that information from the quiz.
Yeah, exactly. Like the purpose of collection.
The purpose of the quiz is probably to provide them with like a lead magnet. So you have to say that, and then you give them the lead magnet, you fulfilled the contract.
You just remember that under the GDPR, for the people who are located within the EU, you have to tell them as well, like who you share the information with. So this would be a perfect example where if you use like Google Forms, or what's the other one that's like a popular form thing, I forget.
Like SurveyMonkey or whatever.
Yeah, like SurveyMonkey. Whether you know it or not, like this is one of those things where we're just all gonna have to learn a lot about this. But like you're sharing the information with them too. Like Google has it on their end. If you're using a Google form, yes, you get access to all the answers and stuff, but so does Google. Like Google has that too. So that's one of those cases where you would have to let them know, like I use Google Forms. And so they have, I'm sharing this information, but only for the purposes of like fulfilling this agreement with you.
Mm-hmm. So Erin just said, thank you, Erin, for this. So she just said, I just put my cursor over her name, and I'm going to assume that she's in the EU because she works at the International School of Brussels.
Oh.
So she just says, we're being heavily briefed that showing steps for compliance is the best place to start and not to panic. But I feel sad that I'm not going to get awesome info. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the first thing. I had this conversation yesterday. It's like, I feel that must suck. Like they're, not freely as we're being given information. What happens if they miss the consent email? Things happen where they're now, it's, their restrictions are being placed on people who live in the EU that literally no one else in the world has to comply with.
I know.
It's really tight. And although it sounds awesome, because I'm thinking like, we should all be doing this. Like there should be no bait and switch. It should be amazing. It's heavily restricted.
And for Erin, by the way, I would say, like, this is why in the beginning I was saying, like, if I were in the EU, I would be putting this stuff on everything. Like, I would be doing the check boxes, the welcome email, the thank you page, and my lead magnet. I've also been suggesting to my clients who are in the EU to add a link to their lead magnet itself. Like, if you have a PDF or something, put it on the bottom. Like, would you like to receive promotional emails from me?
So they get as many chances as possible.
Yeah. Hit them everywhere.
It really will, especially for people in the EU.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really will change the way their ability to market and grow as quickly as they did before, for sure. There's no way. There's no doubt about it.
And who knows with this stuff, I mean, working out the kinks of a law, like sometimes it takes a little time of it being enforced and then them being like, no, that's not what we meant. Like we were really aiming for Google, which is like, I have a feeling more or less what this was.
That's what this is. It's Facebook and Google. Like we said, like, they're not coming after us.
You would hope, right?
I hope, but at the same time too, that doesn't mean that we are immune from it. So okay, let's go, because we've done 90 minutes. So let's go the 4 steps, and then you can share your contact information and everybody can ask you questions.
Yeah, sure. So the 4 basic steps that I'm recommending, and I'm adding this as like a 3-part training series to my course, Fearlessly Legal, but the 4 major steps I recommend that we've gone over today are: number 1, segment and identify on your current list who lives or who is located within the EU / who is location is undisclosed or unknown. Step number 2 is to get affirmative consent from current EU or unknown subscribers. So as we've all talked about, and I recommend, is doing this through a 2 to 3 email, what I'm kind of calling like a re-engagement sequence or campaign of some sort, where you'll like tag or untag them depending on whatever system. There's really no right or wrong here. It's just whatever's like convenient and organized for you. And you want to re-engage them from a marketing standpoint. I do recommend to like offer them some kind of goodie and be like, remember how awesome it is to get emails from me? Like I'm cool and I send out all this stuff. So do something like that. But whatever you do, anything that you, basically like the end line, it has to be May 24th, even though the compliance is May 25th, because you want to remember, as we've talked about a number of times today, deleting equals processing under the GDPR. So deleting all those people as of May 25th would actually be a violation of the GDPR. So for those people who like don't opt back in or consent or whatever, I would delete them on May 24th. And just be nice and safe with that. And you want to remember, in that re-engagement campaign, I would also include the link to your privacy policy. Step number 3 would be to get a new consent system in place, as I'm calling it, to move forward. So I would, if I was in the EU, then I would add this to my opt-in forms, landing pages, everywhere basically that I'm asking for personal information. If I am outside the EU, then I would probably pick 1 to 2 major ones. Personally, I'm going to do the opt-in forms and landing pages that only shows up for people in the EU, and then in the delivery email for people located in the EU. And I'm going to break it down into 2 categories, asking them if they want to receive my newsletter, and then if they want to receive marketing emails from me, and then tag them and do all that fun stuff that we talked about. You want to remember that wherever you decide to do this, you include the link to your privacy policy. So if you have the checkboxes on your forms, you have a link to your privacy policy, and you can say something like, our company strictly abides by our privacy policy, or takes our privacy policy seriously and like abides by these standards, and make the words privacy policy a link to your actual privacy policy. And then the final step, step number 4, is to like shore up your privacy policy. So you really should have had one already because of CalAPA in California, no matter where you live, because if anyone in California can go on your site, you needed a privacy policy. But you have to not only add to your privacy policy, but the other thing I want you to do under the GDPR is add your privacy policy everywhere. So I think in the past, we've only ever thought of the privacy policy as being on the footer of our website. I want you now to have it in anywhere where you're asking for personal information. But I also want you to think about some other sneaky places you might not have thought about. Like if you have an online course, for example, like I use Teachable, I've added it to my Teachable platform. So it's there on the bottom because I am collecting the students' personal information when they sign up for the course, including some pretty sensitive stuff like financial information, right? So like it's important that that stuff's there. And so in terms of adding to your privacy policy, you want to make sure you add the 6 rights that are under the GDPR, which are all built into my template just to make it easy because nobody wants to learn about that. Who to contact directly in your company about your privacy policy, what you do with the information and who you share it with. We talked about the categories, and then putting it everywhere that you seek consent. And so those are really the 4 major steps.
Amazing. Where can they go to get the templates?
Yeah, sure. So on my website, samvanderwielen.com, so it's VANDERWIELEN, you can go into the shop page and I have the privacy policy template. So my privacy policy template is updated with the GDPR section with all the rights that you need to have. It also has the pixels information based on all this updated stuff. It comes with a 2-part video tutorial, and then that's going to walk you through like how to fill out that privacy policy. And then for anybody who gets, I offer something called the Total Website Solution. So if you need a website disclaimer, terms and conditions, and a privacy policy, I have a discounted bundle called the Total Website Solution. That is going to come with the 3-part GDPR video training series that I've created for my course people. I have a course called Fearlessly Legal. So if you get the bundle, you get the training series as well. So it's really going to be like a deeper version of what we did today, but it's also coming with like a PowerPoint that really spells everything out for you guys.
Amazing. I'm going to, when this Facebook Live is over, excuse me, I'll edit the text and I'll add Sam's information there so you guys can easily go onto her site and check out the privacy policy and the templates and all of that stuff, because it's for sure worth the money to just get it from her. She's a lawyer, than to spend the hours crossing your fingers hoping that you have it all covered. So thank you so much for your time. This was really great. I hope that this was helpful for you guys in terms of what to do and why and how to do it. And like I said, I'll add Sam's information to this video. We are going to get it transcribed. It might take like a day or 2, and then we'll link that up as well. So thanks so much. Thanks, Sam, so much.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for watching. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
See ya.